East Coast. And welcome to Improving Language Learning Skills Through Book Clubs. Your NRP hosts today are Rebekah Eller. I know I'm going to mispronounce this again, but Miletus. All right, I'm getting there. She is our resident English language learner, expert, and teacher, along with our rep for Arkansas, Illinois, Louisiana, and Mississippi. And myself, I like to consider myself a part-time DIY researcher, and I am also the assistant director of sales and sales rep for the organization located in the Southeastern Territory, which covers Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, South Carolina, and Alabama. We hope that today's 30-minute session will help you start your own book club. Be sure to stay with us until the end, when we will give you a special promotion code you can use to purchase books to get your own book clubs started with your learners. And feel free to continue to put your greeting out there. So in doing some research for this session, I ran across a study that had this meaningful quote. And the quote is, "Reading individually is a skill. Reading within a community is an art." So just as a way to get us started and to build some community in here, I'd like to just see if anybody would like to share, what does this quote mean to you? And when you think about creating a book club in your classroom, and then is there anything in this quote that stands out to you personally? So go ahead and feel free to put that in the chat box. And Rebekah, I will check back with you as we move through these next couple of slides to see what people are doing. We'll do it right after the agenda. So in today's agenda, we're going to review just a little bit of research to explain why book clubs can be a nice addition to your class. Then we'll get into the meat of our discussion, which will include why you should start a book club, how to set up and plan a book club, ideas for creating community within your book club to increase engagement and learner motivation, building learners' knowledge and experiences, and to identify some specific strategies for approaching and building the reading skills using an EBRI model. That stands for evidence-based reading. And lastly, we'll leave a little bit of room for some questions, and I'll share, we'll talk about a Google folder that we will share when we send you some follow-up information for this. So one of my favorite things about a book club is the community aspect, and we'll talk about how to set up a group and become a community. I kind of wanted to just get into a little bit of some of the research and for some key instructional strategies. And we're going to start specifically with the Universal Design for Learning model, or UDL for short. Some of you might be familiar with the term Universal Design for Learning. There's really nothing that you need to know about this. It's significantly in depth, but there are some learning principles whereby learners, including adult learners, can benefit from two major aspects of UDL. And that is an emphasis on flexible curriculum and the variety of instructional practices, materials, and learning activities that can be used and incorporated as part of varied instruction. All students, including English language learners, older students, those with disabilities, appreciate the multifaceted ways content is presented, as well as options for demonstrating what they know. And UDL also helps educators meet the challenges of serving those with special needs, diverse populations, and those of varying skills while enhancing learning for all. And you might wonder to yourself, well, what does this have to do with starting a book club? Well, creating a book club enables you to plan for and create many activities, including those that fall under the Universal Design for Learning principles, including project and problem-based learning. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I did want to introduce you to three of the principles in here and kind of what they might mean or what they might look like for you in the context of a book club. So the principles consist of multiple means of representation, and this is using different ways to present information and to provide a means of support for learners. As part of a book club, this can mean having students build a timeline, a storyboard, or other visual aids for themselves as they read or complete a book. It may also mean creating discussion groups whereby you team a reader who is stronger in fluency to work with a student who may struggle with the skill, or you can diversify your fluency strategies so that you're introducing some of these one class period at a time by doing things like echo reading in the next class, listen, have students listen to you as you read a sentence, passage, or paragraph, or they take turns in class reading aloud. The second one is multiple means of action and expression, and this can come in the form of providing learners with alternative ways to demonstrate what they know. In a book club format, this can be demonstrated with a graphic organizer activity in class, a writing activity, or watching a companion video if it's appropriate as part of a lesson. Number 3 is multiple means of engagement. Tap learners' interest by offering choices in content and tools as a way to motivate learners by offering adjustable levels for challenges for each learner. Maybe it's working with them to demonstrate and practice using various context clues to decipher vocabulary words or terms, or perhaps it's engaging them to read more challenging passages aloud or to expand on a writing exercise. Whatever your means of getting there looks like, these are all principles that are part of UDL. And Rebecca, I forgot to check in with you. Did we get any chats on that?
Yeah, we've got some great responses. Sharon at Linear Text says that she can relate to the idea of reading in a community as an art, specifically because it's encouraging and sharing without silencing others' voices. I love that. Charlotte says that we read through the filter of our own life experiences. Absolutely, that's an adult learning principle. And that sharing those with others creates a more robust understanding of the work and a more nuanced piece of art. Your statement is an art, Sharon. I love it. Literacy Area says reading's not passive. You're constructing meaning while reading, and that meaning is situated socially. That is fantastic, very insightful. Krista says that she is currently doing a book club. They're reading 2 books, and one of her challenges is that the students do a spoiler alert and tell the end of the story before some other students are finished. And we also have Kathy, who says that a book club's a safe space to practice reading and communication skills.
Excellent. I like the spoiler alert idea, although I hate that when I'm watching a movie. Excellent. Great. Thank you for participating. One last bit of research here. Book clubs innately provide a level of community, especially for low-level learners. And for low-level students, it's best if you select the reading stimulus for this level of students, as they may be reluctant to voice their choice. For students at higher reading levels, give them some autonomy over selecting the reading material, either by having them vote based on a few books you selected or asking them to select from books that are of a similar reading level for your target audience. Either way, you'll find that what you create will be a thriving community where conversation provides the value to unique approaches to literature. Because students come from so many varied backgrounds, this was just mentioned in a bunch of the chats, you may find that as students participate in discussion groups, that they will begin to gravitate towards students whose opinions and perspectives are vastly different from their own. Whatever their motivation, you'll see that finding a purpose within reading discussion can be inspiring for all involved. Ultimately, we all want engaged learners, and creating a book club offers a level of inoculation that you may not find with other reading activities. It allows learners to deepen their sense of application for many of the reading practices you will teach. And because learners are all reading the same level, it increases their use of shared vocabulary and relationships they develop both in and out of class. So take it away, Rebecca.
So why start a book club? In a book club, the emphasis is on reading, comprehending, and also being understood in discussion. A lot of times the conversation that's generated in a book club is student-driven rather than text-driven, which is what we often get in a classroom setting. And this provides an environment where students are able to discuss issues that they care about. It also builds community, including helping students feel like they're a part of a welcoming English-speaking adult community. And finally, it promotes family literacy and shows a parent as a reading role model for kids. Research shows a very strong correlation between literacy of a mother or parent and the child's educational outcomes. This increased exposure to English reading encourages our students to pursue their own interests outside of the group by reading magazines, newspapers, or whatever they like at home. And this also provides reading role models to others in the household. The first time I started a book club for English language learners, I recruited a group of students and I gave them a choice of a few books I had around my learning center. My lack of planning created much more ambiguity than I would have liked for the students and also for me. I've done this several times now, and over time, I've sort of refined a process and found that it's helpful for me if I set aside planning time and ask some questions with myself and my team. For me, I divide the questions into 4 categories of why, who, what, and how. We're going to run through those categories now, starting with why. I like to always ask myself, what is the purpose of this book club? Educators start book clubs for lots of different reasons, and they're all valid. But the goal that we have in mind will have a tremendous impact on our planning process. So some things to think through might be, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on mixing native and non-native speakers? I think it depends on the level, and we can talk more about that at the end if you would like. Is your primary goal to build academic skill? If so, are you going to be acting as a teacher or a facilitator in the book club? And are you teaching content through what you're reading, or is your goal to teach reading and language skill? Another thing I like to ask is, are you starting the book club to combat holiday slide, summer slide, or even the new COVID slide? Because that might impact how long this club runs. Is building community relationships and belonging your ultimate motivation? Or is this a casual group for people who already love reading? Or are you making a primary goal of cultivating an interest in reading? Once we know why we're starting the book club, it's great to think about who the club will serve. Is the group going to be open to students at all levels, or is it targeted to a particular group? Do these students need to be enrolled in an academic program in conjunction at your organization, or are they free to join your book club as a standalone program? And this is one where I have learned the hard way for sure. If this is a family literacy program, are you going to have children present? And do you need childcare for siblings outside the target age range? If you do, and that's not a part of your normal offerings, be sure that you check on any insurance considerations that you might need to explore before you set up childcare at your site. After we know our who, we can narrow down the audience a little bit more. You can form a book club at almost any NRS level above beginning literacy, if you choose the right resources and activities. But for the purposes of this Lunch and Learn, we've targeted our starting audience in the 3 levels you can see designated in bold print. In order for you and your students to get the most out of the book club, we suggest keeping these defined with the activities we're going to use today to levels 3 and up. We chose this starting point because this is a point where students are able to focus a little bit more on fluency and comprehension rather than just word recognition and phonemic awareness. So let's talk about our what. What will you read and how will those resources be chosen? High interest is super, super important here. Reading in a non-native language is challenging. So whether you're reading fiction or nonfiction, we want to make sure that the content is appealing to our learners so that they're motivated to continue. Not all book clubs just read books, so you can also think about if you want to include articles and short stories. Will you choose the reading material, or will club members have a choice? As Karen mentioned earlier, one of my favorite ways to do this is to work with a librarian or a department resource coordinator at my site to make a short list of suitable materials that are available. Then I write brief descriptions of them and let the club members rank them. Another important thing to think about is what you need. Do you need print books, large print, ebooks, audiobooks, or a combination of options. It's very important that we consider accessibility for all learners. In the planning stages, we don't always know who will choose to attend the book club. I frequently had students request large print text, and in one of the clubs I facilitated, we had a participant who was legally blind. She accessed all of her books through the National Library Service for the Blind through the Library of Congress. So it was really important that we choose titles that they had available. Similarly, if you're planning on using listening and audio as a teaching tool, you may want to be sure that there are also transcripts available for any participants who have hearing differences. Now on to the how. How will you measure success of this project? Depending on what your circumstances are, this may be determined by your funder if you're required to meet certain benchmarks. But I have found that it's nice to have my measurement tool prepared before I begin so that all of my steps are intentional, just like we plan what we're going to test students on before we plan the lessons. I also like to think about if the group meetings will be time-bound or ongoing. So is this just for one semester, just for the summer, or will it run year-round? And how frequently will you meet? Are your students going to need individual copies of the reading materials? And if so, how will they obtain those? Is your program going to make a purchase? Are students going to purchase individually? Will they come through the school library, a public library, etc.? And finally, will the students read at home, in class, or a combination of those? Having the book at home can be great for students who need more time to read and understand, but not all students have an environment that's conducive to reading at home. So one thing we need to ask ourselves is, will they still be able to participate in the meetings if they're not able to do the reading while they're at home?
So let's turn your attention now and talk about building community. According to research, book clubs, conversations, inspiring community by Nathaniel Petrich, and this is cited here on this slide. Book clubs create a community of learning and discussion that translates both through K-12 and onto adult learners. And this can be especially true for language learners who feel isolated in their own communities because they don't speak the language, have trouble understanding the language, or otherwise just feel isolated due to lack of family or friends who can't relate to their situations. Or they may not be around family and friends who live in the same community. So it's important to build a community within the class and among students so they can all get to a level of deeper understanding and learning. Hang on one sec. So Rebekah is going to talk to you about a little experience she had while she was in Japan.
If any of you on this webinar with us have ever lived in an environment where you're not proficient in the dominant language, you will know how isolating this can feel. When I moved to Japan, I spoke almost no Japanese. I knew two words, genja, which meant Shinto shrine, and arigato, which I learned from the Domo Arigato song. So for the first year, I often resorted to things like physical comedy and facial expressions to engage with other people. And this can make you feel like you've lost a part of your identity as an adult. But book and conversation groups offer a space safe for learners to communicate with other adults and engage with adult topics that they care about in an environment where there are other people who also struggle with the language. So in this brief section, we're going to talk about some ways to build that community. Any of you who have ever had a conversation with me know that I love group norm setting. I somehow seem to bring that into everything. In group norm setting, all of the participants in a group co-create its rules. This can help all members in the group feel a sense of ownership. I'm laughing because Greg says Jenja is a redhead. Depending on the level of students in a particular group, I like to do this by asking some questions and posting the answers. Then I have students vote on the most important items. Depending on what the level of your students are, you're going to need some different scaffolding here. At higher levels, I provide fewer guiding questions. At lower levels, I provide some really basic questions like, what does a good teacher do? What does a bad teacher do? What does a good student do? What activities do you like to do when you're learning? And then I provide them some examples to select from. Breakout rooms are consistently a favorite with my students. So if you're having your book club virtually, that's something that I highly recommend. My students say they like getting to know each other and making friends, and that this gives them more time to speak in a relaxed way. It can also help to improve retention because students want to join the group to see their friends after they've had a difficult day. If you're doing this in person, of course, you can just break the group out into separate areas of the room or space and have small groups work together. Another thing that I like is polls. They're a quick and fantastic way to check for understanding. And if you keep them anonymous, it can be a great way to determine what percentage of a group has understood a certain concept without putting anyone on the spot. That sometimes students are embarrassed to say what they don't understand in front of everybody, but if they can do it anonymously, they might be more willing. It's always a good way to take the temperature of a room too and see how your students are feeling on a particular day. I teach all of my classes at night, so I sometimes use this to ask about energy levels or how students' day has gone so far before we get started. And finally, it's a really nice tool for teaching students to read bar graphs. The last thing I want to talk about for community is community visitors. One gift we've gotten from remote instruction is that it's very easy to recruit community members to visit your group. So for example, if you're reading about a Latina entrepreneur, invite someone from the community to come and speak to your group. It's also a great learning opportunity for students to write down questions they want to ask in advance. If you're reading about a rideshare driver, invite somebody who has that job into your book club.
Hey, Rebecca, before we move on, we have a couple of questions in the Q&A, and one of them is, what are some examples of measuring tools? Are those things that you have built into your Google folder that we can share?
They're going to be very individualized by program. So one thing that many programs measure is attendance hours. So you might want to know how many people came and how long they stayed. That would be a measurement tool for success. Some programs measure just by satisfaction. So if you're going to create a satisfaction survey, create it before you begin the book club so that you can make sure you're doing the things you're going to ask the students if they were satisfied with. And of course, another one is if you're in a setting where you do standardized testing, is that you could monitor for changes in test scores.
Another question is, how many people do you like in a breakout room?
My personal preference is 2 to 4, depending on what I'm having the students do. I think that if there are more than that, the naturally quiet students become quieter and the naturally more verbose students like Karen and I become louder. So I like to keep it so that it feels like a very small group chat, but I have seen people successfully facilitate them with a lot more people. So I think it depends on the comfort of you as a facilitator and of your students.
And the last question we have in the chat box, which I'll answer, is, do you have suggestions for where to get multiple copies of easily accessible books? And yes, we will address that at the end of this. Finally, as is the goal for all of these exercises, instructors will find that with a book club, you'll be able to strengthen students' reading strategies and tools for their toolboxes. along with activating peer-to-peer communication. And this will lead all students to a deeper understanding of the content and provide practical application for the skills that students can then translate into other coursework, like reading nonfiction, science and social studies content, or reading higher levels of literature content in preparation for HSC tests. And this obviously goes along with the skills that you're going to see here. So not only writing and reading, but also speaking and listening.
So with the idea of strengthening these skills, you're ready to develop your instructional plan. Here are a few things that we find have worked from our experience, but again, there is almost no wrong way to do this, so find what works for you. We like to allow the audience to dictate the instruction and practice. Where appropriate, it's great to have them select the book that they want to read, for example, based on descriptions that you have available. We have some books in a GEMMA series that include audio components, lesson plans, and reading guides. They also contain other support materials that can help the students and you as a teacher. So if you're new to this and you're nervous about creating all that, we do have some pre-made options for you. We also like to concentrate on project-based instruction, whereby the students work on projects together in association with the book. A few things we would suggest are timelines, character development charts, vocabulary flashcards or games, dialogue scripts, and other things that ask for learner engagement. And finally, as your students get the hang of the book club and know what to expect, we like to move away from facilitating the instruction to more independent discussion and student-led work in the group that focuses on reading and skill development. So let's take a look at how you can build reading strategies. In the last part of this session, we're going to look at an EBRI, or evidence-based reading instruction template, and explore components that could be included in a book club if you're doing your reading together, rather than having the students read independently at home. We're going to touch on strategies related to warm-up, reading skills, and wrap-ups, and you will all get a link to a Google folder containing an EBRI template and some graphic organizers that we welcome you to use and share as widely as you would like. Next slide, please, Karen.
Oh, I have it on EBRI template. Do you want to go to this?
Oh, I can't see that. Okay, I'm going to keep going, friends. Use an EBRI template to set the tone for your book club. Depending on how much time you have allotted, we would suggest using at least one thing from each category to help you create a robust reading comprehension strategy, but you could absolutely use all of these if you have enough time. So for example, if you know that the vocabulary in the piece might be difficult or unfamiliar to learners, we strongly suggest reviewing it first. If the story's about an Uber driver, you can set the topic by doing some pre-reading work, like asking students if they've ever used an Uber or a Lyft. Do they prefer Uber, Lyft, or taxi, and why? Do they have Uber drivers in their countries? You might get some really interesting responses to this. When I was in the Philippines, their equivalent of Uber was called Grab, which I found super scary, actually. So review any words and word parts that you think might be difficult for learners before they start. And always try to save the think and discuss for last, because the students will have built up a lot more knowledge and vocabulary, and they will have had longer to think about the topic and kind of synthesize their thoughts before jumping in.
Before we go any further, I'm just going to say we're at 12:30. So those of you who want to stay on the call will continue. You'll also get a recording of this if you need to leave or drop out now.
So sorry, everyone. Additional possible strategies include some on the list. We'll pull out a few for closer look, but this is by no means complete. The possibilities are pretty much endless here. So as a warm-up, you can ask students to make predictions based on the title or cover art of the story. What type of story do you think this is going to be? Is it a mystery, a love story, a biography? If you're reading nonfiction, for example, a book about Abraham Lincoln, you can just ask students if they've heard of him before and what have they heard. Again, if you know that there will be new vocabulary, introduce it in advance. And during and after the reading, throughout the process, make personal experience and connection to the reading. Have students identify main ideas and details, draw conclusions, summarize, and ask and answer comprehension questions. So here's an example of a warm-up. This book is written at a reading level of about 2.9. For lower level students, I might ask questions about this, like, who is this story about? What is she doing in the photo? When does the story take place? And do you think that this is an old story or a modern story? How do you know? Where is she? Why is she looking out the window? Summarizing is also a great life and work skill. In a book club, it is particularly good for challenging your higher level students and for making sure everyone understands what they've been reading. I like to cover who, what, when, where, and why as a whole group and save the questions that are written on the palm of this hand for small group, pair, and breakout work. Consistently following a pattern like this can help students to begin asking these questions themselves instead of you generating them. So some things we can ask might be, have you ever done this thing that happened in the story or experienced this? What did you do next? How did you feel when that happened? Or just simply tell me more. This helps the students develop a more conversational way of speaking with each other instead of the conversation being like an interview. I always have the goal of moving the groups toward being as student-led as possible. And as the students get more comfortable generating their own questions, they take more ownership of the group experience. I think of this from the quote, "The one who does the work does the learning." So for any of my fellow book nerds here with us today, we all know that the book is always better than the movie because a movie never quite lives up to what we have imagined. Skilled readers often develop our own mental movies in our heads as we read. And I like to talk about that mental movie with students. Creating and sharing sensory descriptions is a really good way to build both vocabulary and comprehension. So one thing that you can do is to think about the first time you ate one of your favorite foods. For me, it's the first time I ate ramen in Japan. When you first enjoyed that food, what did you smell? How did the steam hit your face? How did that feel? What noises did you hear? Sounds from the kitchen, people slurping at the table nearby, rumbling in your stomach. And what did you see when you first looked into the bowl? Did it look good? It might be easiest to begin practicing this using photos. I like to begin by searching National Geographic images online. The photos are stunning and they're so rich in content. I ask students to imagine they're standing in the photo. Where exactly will you stand? What do you see, hear, feel, smell, taste? Practicing with images can make this skill come more easily when students need to move on to visualizing from text alone. Compare and contrast is another good academic skill that can work well in a book club. You can let learners know they're going to compare two characters from the story to see what's different and what's the same. Have them draw a Venn diagram. On the left-hand side, write the name of one character, on the right-hand side, the other, and in the middle, things that are the same. Working with a partner or in small groups, they can write detail from the story into the correct categories, and they can also work with comparing the situation of a character's life at the beginning and end of a story. If you're reading short stories or poems, you can even compare two different pieces of reading using a Venn diagram. These three books from Gemma that you can see here all have themes related to mother-daughter relationships, and they can be used as part of a compare and contrast activity. The titles are Barn Cat, A Girl's Guide to the Islands, and Training Days. I find that something like this can be a really nice topic for a book club once they're used to each other, because many of them are going through cross-cultural parenting situations. So the parent and the child may not have the same first language, and they may be dealing with very different cultural context for lots of issues, and it's nice to have community around that.
Okay, sorry, not trying to push you along.
No.
I just hit the button again. So let's talk about how you can build your resources for your library. Building a resource library is critical to a book club's success, as we all know. So use referrals from your local library in tandem with purchase materials. And we offer a lot here, so we're going to talk about a few of those as well. Oops. I think I got these mixed up, so we'll start here and then I'll go back to the other one.
These are some of the books that we like and recommend. My students have enjoyed several of these. This Greta Gorsch book is about an Uber driver. I have a lot of students whose husbands do rideshare or taxi driving, and they relate to this. These Heights novels are absolutely hilarious. This family goes on crazy adventures, and these are at a very low reading level. So if your students are in the 1 to 2.5 range, this is a great choice. And if you're looking for something shorter with comprehension afterward, the More Novel Scene series has really nice, relatable, shorter stories. Every story in the book is related to the same group of characters.
So I'm going to go back to this page and do a little bit of self-promoting for Rebekah here. Rebekah has posted 3 Teacher Tuesday book club articles on her LinkedIn page. You can find her LinkedIn page. If you are on LinkedIn, you can just dial up Rebekah Eller, and you'll see where she's got these 3 articles listed here. The links are also connected here, and I'll refresh this too so that you get the last link on this last article. But if you want to start here, she's got some great information for you, and I encourage you to read these. They'll go a little bit more in depth based on what we talked about here today and give you a bit more of a guidebook for creating your own book club. Lastly, and to kind of put a period on this, we have a gift for you today. This is a promotion that we are extending to everybody on this call. It starts today and goes through the end of December. You will get 10% off all titles in both the Gemma and the Heights series. If you decide that you want to do this online, you're going to use code GEMW21. And or you can call anybody in our customer service department and they can add these to your quotes. All quotes are going to be good for 60 days. And you'll find that the Gemma series offers quite a wide variety of reading levels in here. So you can kind of group these reading levels together and have your students vote based on the descriptions that we have back out on our website. Lastly, before we get to the questions, this is going to conclude our content for today. If you need to find your sales rep, you can use the Find a Sales Rep button at the top of our webpage. Find your sales rep to see who covers your territory. Again, if you are in Rebekah's territory, Arkansas, Illinois, Louisiana, or Mississippi, you can feel free to reach out to her. And if you are in the Southeast, in Alabama, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, or Tennessee, feel free to reach out to me. And we will get to some Q&A in here. Let me just go back to this.
Karen, I saw one question pop up in the chat wanting to know if we use technology in our book clubs. Right now, I'm still completely virtual where I'm teaching. So I do everything that I do with my students through Zoom. And the tool that I like to use best with them is Google Jamboard. It's free, and it's easy for them to save their work, and it's very simple to use.
I'm going to just read two that we have in the Q&A. So Barry Wilkes would like to appreciate knowing other sources for titles and books that have worked for other ESL book clubs and the level of the book. So if you have any ideas, feel free to put that in the chat and we will capture the chat and send that out as well. And then Karen Bowen has a question on any thoughts about dealing with a learner who is consistently dominating the conversation.
This can be a tricky thing. Sometimes I have put roles into a bowl. So this is your role, like the note taker, the speaker, the writer, and had students draw out roles to kind of try to keep things a little bit more organized. Another thing might be if you have the ability to call on students, to start calling on other learners, or to just say that was a really interesting comment. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Karen, I'll try to write up something a little bit more thorough for that, and I'll give it to Dan for when he sends out everything.
Okay, and it looks like we've got a couple people who have shared some books that they've used in book clubs. Woman is No Man by Etaf Rum, The Strange Journey of Alice Pendlebury and Mark Levy, Cleanup by Nora McClintock. Some people are commenting they've used the novel Scenes, especially with low-level learners. We'll capture a list of these books and also send that out with all of this. So I don't want to hold anybody up in case you do only have a short period of time for lunch. We appreciate all your time, energy, and efforts and everything that you do to make the wonderful world of adult ed engaging and successful for your learners.
Thank you all so much for being here.
One last question. Barry asked, do men usually join book clubs? Well, I guess if you're in a prison, you have no choice. You could just start one and they'll have to come.
I have had book clubs with men in them, but my classes on a whole tend to skew more female. So I typically have more men than women.
And I'll just say the Gemma titles, Jackie Robinson, One Season in the Sun, we have out on the description list which books are kind of more heavily female oriented and which ones are more heavily male oriented. So we'll send the links to those support materials as well when we send the follow-up. So thank you all for your time, energy, and efforts, and everybody else have a great day, great weekend coming up. And the time changes, so I think we're getting an hour, everybody. Keep that in mind.